Just email the specs to R&D, she cut me off. I've got a conference call with the Tokyo office in 5. We'll look at it when we have time. Talk later. The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, the silence of my workshop pressing in. On me, when we have time. She had all the time in the world for conference calls and budget reviews, but not 1 minute for the man who had taught her how to read a blueprint. It was a small thing, a single phone call, but it felt like a door being quietly, firmly closed in my face. The algorithm, by the way, was never looked at. I found the email I sent sitting in an unread folder 6 months later during a routine system check. The final act of my erasure before the public execution in the boardroom was more subtle and, in a way, more cruel. The main hallway leading to the executive suite had always been what I called the legacy wing. The walls were lined with photographs and awards documenting the company's journey. A picture of me and Eleanor in the garage, the first major. Contract, team photos from the early scrappy years. It was our story, written in silver frames. One Monday morning, I walked down that hall and found the walls bare, stripped, white and sterile as a hospital corridor. Panicked, I sought out one of the facility managers, a man I'd hired 20 years ago. "Frank, where are the photos? Where did everything go?" He couldn't meet my eyes. He shuffled his feet and mumbled, "Ms. Vance's orders, Arthur. She said she wanted a more modern, minimalist aesthetic." "So she just threw them out?" I asked, my heart sinking. 30 years of history? No, he said quickly. "They're in storage, down in the sub-basement archive. She said it was important to preserve them. Like artifacts in a tomb." Later that day, I went down to the sub-basement. It was a cold, windowless concrete room filled with rows of metal shelves holding boxes of old financial records. And there, in a forgotten corner, leaning against a damp wall, was our history. The picture of me and Eleanor, smiling, full of hope, was staring up at the dusty ceiling. She hadn't thrown our story away. She had buried it alive. I stood there in that cold, silent room, and I finally understood. This wasn't about modernizing or streamlining. This was a systematic demolition. She wasn't just taking over a company, she was erasing its founder. She needed to remove the foundation so that everyone would believe she had built the skyscraper all by herself. And as I stood there looking at the smiling face of my young wife in that photograph, I heard her voice in my memory. "Promise me you'll look after her." I had. I had given her the company, the power, the world I had built. I had kept my promise to Eleanor. But in doing so, I had forgotten a cardinal rule of architecture. A structure cannot stand without a solid, respected foundation. And my daughter, the CEO of Vance Innovations, had just declared her own foundation to be obsolete. The drive home after being fired was a blur, but once I was back inside the familiar walls of my house, a house I built with my own hands, a place where every nail was driven with purpose, the fog of shock began to clear. It was replaced by the cold, clear light of architectural analysis. I had been systematically deconstructed, my role in my own company disassembled piece by piece. First, my authority was stripped away, then my team, then my history. Finally, my presence. It wasn't a fit of pique from a petulant daughter. It was a plan, a blueprint for a hostile takeover, executed from the inside. I spent that evening not in mourning, but in review. I went to my study, a room filled not with chrome and glass, but with oak, leather, and the comforting scent of old books. This was my true office. I turned on my custom-built computer, a machine with more processing power than half the servers at Vance Innovations, and I began to walk through the digital hallways of the empire I had created. As chairman emeritus, I had retained high-level, read-only access to the company's network, a courtesy, a token. Charlotte assumed I would use it to occasionally check stock prices or read internal memos. She saw it as a pacifier for the old man. She never imagined I would use it for a structural audit. For hours I dug. I bypassed the polished, user-friendly corporate interface she had implemented and went deeper into the system's core architecture. And there, I began to see the true nature of her vision. It wasn't a vision of innovation. It was a vision of acquisition. She was preparing to sell. The evidence was buried in layers of encrypted files, but the patterns were clear to the man who had designed the system. She was in late-stage negotiations with a massive, soulless tech conglomerate, a company called Omnicorp. They were notorious for acquiring innovative smaller companies, gutting them for their patents, laying off the original staff, and absorbing the brand into their monolithic structure. Vance Innovations, my life's work, wasn't going to be her legacy. It was going to be her golden parachute. The deal was contingent on one thing: a clean, unencumbered leadership transition. Omnicorp didn't want to buy a company with a lingering, influential founder in the background. They didn't want a Steve Jobs situation, a ghost who might return to haunt the boardroom. They wanted the founder not just retired, but completely and utterly severed from the company's identity and operations. My public firing, the erasure of my history from the walls, it wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a business transaction. I was a liability to be cleared from the balance sheet before the final sale. The pain of this discovery was sharp, but it was quickly overshadowed by a cold, galvanizing anger. This wasn't just about my feelings anymore. This was about the hundreds of employees, my people, whose careers and livelihoods were about to be sacrificed on the altar of my daughter's greed. It was about the company's soul, the innovative spirit we had fostered, which was about to be strip-mined for patents and discarded. My promise to Eleanor wasn't just about giving Charlotte the company. It was about looking after her, steering her away from the rocks. But she hadn't just stumbled. She had deliberately aimed the ship at an iceberg, hoping to cash in the insurance policy. I kept digging, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I analyzed the proposed sale price, the terms, the timeline. The deal was set to close in 1 month. My firing was the last major hurdle. Charlotte had likely celebrated that evening, believing her path was finally clear. And that's when I saw it. A small, almost imperceptible detail in the digital architecture of the deal. The entire acquisition was being managed through a new, highly secure project management system Charlotte had licensed specifically for this purpose. All the contracts, all the due diligence, all the communications with Omnicorp were housed within this digital fortress. She had locked it down tight. No one outside of her inner circle, her CFO, her legal counsel, and Omnicorp's team had access. No one, she thought, but me. This is where my story pivots from a tragedy to a strategic campaign. When I first designed the foundational network for Vance Innovations 20 years ago, I built it like I would build a skyscraper. I built in redundancies, security protocols, and firewalls. But I also built in one final fail-safe feature, a master key. It wasn't a password written on a sticky note. It was a ghost protocol, a sequence of dormant code embedded deep within the server's root directory. I called it the Eleanor Protocol. It was designed as an ultimate emergency override, a way for me to regain control of the entire system in the event of a catastrophic external hack or internal sabotage. To activate it, one needed a complex 2-part cryptographic key. The first part was a string of code I knew by heart. The second part was a physical key, a small, custom-designed USB drive that was required to complete the authentication handshake. I had never used it. It was a doomsday device, a relic of a more paranoid era in cybersecurity. I had almost forgotten it existed. Charlotte, in her rush to modernize and put her own stamp on the company, had built her new, glossy systems on top of my old foundation. She had redecorated the skyscraper, but she had never bothered to inspect the bedrock it was built. And she didn't know the Eleanor protocol was still there, silent, dormant, waiting. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating my face. A slow smile spread across my lips for the first time that day. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of an architect who has just discovered that the demolition crew has left behind a single, perfectly placed, load-bearing column that they don't know exists. My plan began to form, not as a messy act of revenge, but as a precise architectural intervention. I couldn't stop the sale directly. A legal challenge would be a long, ugly public battle, and Charlotte would paint it as the ramblings of a bitter old man. I had to be smarter. I had to use her own weapons, her arrogance, her secrecy, her absolute faith in her own control against her. The first step was to get the key. I had only 2 copies of the Eleanor Protocol USB drive. One was in a safe deposit box at my bank. The other I had given to Eleanor years ago. If anything ever happens to me, I had told her, and the company is at risk, this is the key. It bypasses everything. She had kept it in her jewelry box, a place she called her box of treasures. After she passed, Charlotte had, with a great show of sentimental duty, taken possession of that jewelry box. "I want to keep it close, Dad," she had said, her eyes moist. "To remember her." I now realized she had likely appraised every item in it the next day. But the key, a simple, unmarked silver USB drive, would have looked like a piece of junk to her, a meaningless trinque bahinique. She wouldn't have given a second thought. I was willing to bet it was still there, sitting in that box in the master bedroom of the house I had helped her buy. Getting it back would be the first test of my new role as an invisible force. I needed a reason to be in her house, alone, with access to her bedroom. A direct request was out of the question. I had to be invited. I had to be underestimated. I waited 2 days, letting the dust of my firing settle. Then I made another phone call, my voice now carefully calibrated to sound broken, defeated, and utterly lost. "Charlotte," I said, my voice thick with a fabricated weariness. "It's your father." There was a pause. "What do you want, Dad?" she asked, her tone wary, suspicious. I just wanted to get some of Eleanor's things," I said, my voice cracking. "Things I left at the office. The photos from the hallway. You said they were in storage. I'd like to have them. For the memories." This was the perfect lure. It was a request that came from a place of sentimentality and weakness, the very things she despised and underestimated in me. It would confirm her narrative. I was a pathetic old man, clinging to the past. It would pose no threat. "They're not at the office anymore," she said, her voice softening with a patronizing pity. "I had them moved to the house for safekeeping. They're in the attic." "Oh," I said, feigning confusion. Could I possibly come by and pick them up? When you're not there, of course. I don't want to be a bother." Another pause. I could hear her weighing the options. The risk of me being in her house versus the satisfaction of seeing me so utterly defeated. Her arrogance won, just as I knew it would. "Fine," she sighed, the sound of a queen granting a pathetic favor to a court jester. "I have a charity luncheon tomorrow. I'll be out from noon until at least 4. I'll leave a key under the mat. Get your pictures. And Dad?" "Yes?" "Don't touch anything else." "I won't," I promised, my voice dripping with a humility that was pure performance. I hung up the phone, a cold, triumphant fire igniting in my chest. The door to the fortress was about to be opened for me by the Queen herself. She thought she was allowing me to retrieve a few dusty photographs. She had no idea I was coming to reclaim the master key to her entire kingdom. The obsolete relic was about to prove he was the only one who still knew how the system truly worked. The next day, I watched Charlotte's car pull out of her long, winding driveway at precisely 12:05 p.m. She was driving the sleek silver convertible I knew the company had leased for her, a symbol of the new, ostentatious era she represented. I was parked a block away in my unassuming 10-year-old sedan, a car that, like its owner, was reliable, understated, and completely overlooked. I gave her 10 minutes, enough time to be well on her way, before I started my engine. Walking up to the front door of her palatial home, a sterile, modernist glass box that Eleanor would have hated, felt like crossing into enemy territory. The key was exactly where she said it would be, under a ridiculously pristine welcome mat. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. She saw me as so utterly defeated, so completely harmless, that she didn't even consider the possibility of a threat. It was the fundamental flaw in her design. She had never, not for one moment, considered me her equal. I let myself in. The house was cold, not in temperature, but in spirit. It was decorated like a magazine spread, impersonal and untouchable. There were no family photos on the walls, only expensive abstract art. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the climate control system. I didn't waste time. I went straight upstairs to the master bedroom. The room was vast, with a wall of glass overlooking a meticulously manicured lawn. In the center was a walk-in closet the size of my first apartment, and inside that closet, on a built-in vanity, sat Eleanor's jewelry box. It was a simple, rosewood box, inlaid with mother-of-pearl, a gift I had given her on our 5th anniversary. Seeing it there, amidst the sterile opulence of Charlotte's life, felt like a desecration. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled among the familiar pieces, her grandmother's locket, the simple strand of pearls I bought her when Charlotte was born, was the key. It was an unmarked brushed silver USB drive, looking completely out of place, exactly as I had remembered. I slipped it into my pocket, the cool metal a comforting weight against my palm. I felt a surge of adrenaline, of triumph. Phase 1 was complete. But as I stood there, a different impulse took over. I wasn't just here for the key. I was here to understand the enemy, and this room was her sanctuary. I began a quick, methodical search, not for things to steal, but for information. In a drawer of her bedside table, beneath a stack of scented stationery, I found it, her personal tablet. It was password protected, of course, but I had designed the security protocols for her first computer when she was a teenager. I knew her habits. I knew how she thought. The password, I guessed, would be a combination of arrogance and sentimentality. I tried Vance CEO1, nothing. Then I tried something else. Eleanor, 1985, the year Charlotte was born. The screen For the next 20 minutes, I conducted a digital reconnaissance. I found what I expected. Emails confirming the final stages of the Omnicorp deal, a timeline for the closing, drafts of the press release announcing the acquisition. But I also found something more personal and far more damning. I found a hidden folder containing her personal financial statements, and I found a series of emails between her and a private wealth manager. She wasn't just planning to sell the company. She was planning her escape. The emails detailed a complex scheme to move the proceeds of the sale, a sum that would be in the hundreds of millions, into a series of offshore accounts in jurisdictions with no extradition treaties. She wasn't just cashing out. She was planning to vanish, leaving the gutted company, its employees, and her own history behind without a trace. And then I saw the final coldest piece of the puzzle. In a subfolder labeled Estate Planning, I found a single, chilling document. It was a draft of a legal petition prepared by her lawyers, a petition for conservatorship over my assets, citing declining cognitive health and erratic financial behavior. It was dated 3 weeks ago. The last piece of the blueprint clicked into place. Firing me was just the first step. If I had protested, if I had caused trouble, she would have immediately filed this petition. she would have used my own grief and righteous anger as evidence of my instability. She had planned for every contingency. She hadn't just built a plan to sell the company, she had built a cage for me. I took a picture of the document with my phone, my hands steady now, the earlier tremor replaced by an icy calm. This was no longer just a business battle. This was a fight for my freedom, my identity. I closed the tablet, wiped it clean of my fingerprints, and placed it exactly where I had found it. Before I left the room, I did one more thing, an impulse, an architect's signature. I took the small wooden bird Ben had carved for me from my pocket. I had started carrying it as a reminder of what was real, and I placed it gently inside Eleanor's jewelry box, right where the key had been. It was a small, quiet act, a substitution. She had taken something of value from this box to execute her betrayal. I was leaving behind a symbol of clumsy, heartfelt, and honest creation. Let her find that, I thought. Let her wonder what it meant. I walked downstairs, my purpose clear. I went to the attic, a dusty, forgotten space, and found the box of old photographs. I took it, as planned. It was my alibi, the reason for my visit. As I walked out of the house, locking the door behind me, I felt like a different man. The grieving father who had entered was gone forever. I was now a soldier in a war I didn't start, but one I was determined to finish. Back in the safety of my own study, the real work began. With both halves of the cryptographic key, the code in my head, and the USB drive in my hand, I could now activate the Eleanor protocol. It was a delicate operation. I couldn't just storm the digital castle. Charlotte was arrogant, but not stupid. Her IT team would detect a full-scale system override. I had to be a ghost in the machine. The protocol had a secondary function. 1. I had designed for just such a scenario of internal corruption. It was a deep audit mode, which allowed me to create a perfect, time-stamped, and incorruptible mirror of the entire network, all without triggering any active system alerts. It was a digital ghost, silently duplicating every file, every email, every keystroke. For the next week, I became a nocturnal creature. I worked from midnight until dawn, the hours when network traffic was at its lowest. I initiated the deep audit. The data flowed to a secure, encrypted server I had set up, a digital safe deposit box. I copied everything related to the Omnicorp deal, the contracts, the hidden clauses that detailed the plans for mass layoffs, the private communications between Charlotte and the Omnicorp CEO, and I copied her personal files, the ones she thought were firewalled from the corporate network, the offshore account details, the conservatorship petition, and her private emails, which were filled with dismissive, cruel remarks about me and the old guard at the company. I gathered an arsenal of truth, a digital dossier that would be her undoing. As the day of the Omnicorp deal approached, I could sense her growing confidence. The company-wide memos became more frequent, filled with corporate buzzwords about a bold new chapter and synergistic futures. She was preparing the employees for their own execution, dressing it up as a glorious evolution. My final move had to be timed to perfection. It couldn't be an email. It couldn't be a lawsuit. That would be too slow, too easy for her to spin. It had to be an architectural intervention. It had to be a public, undeniable, and structurally flawless demolition of her entire narrative. Found my opportunity in the final, all-hands meeting she had scheduled for the day before the sale was to be finalized. She had booked the grand auditorium in the Vance Innovations building. Attendance was mandatory. She was going to announce the merger, her moment of ultimate triumph. She was going to stand on a stage in front of the people whose lives she was about to destroy and accept their applause. She had no idea that the architect of the building had other plans for the presentation. She thought she controlled the system. But the system now belonged to me. The master key was in my hand, the ghost was in the machine, and he was about to make his presence known. The obsolete relic was about to deliver one final, unforgettable keynote address. In the 24 hours before Charlotte's triumphant all-hands meeting, I did not sleep. Sleep was a luxury I could not afford. Instead, I worked, moving with a quiet, focused intensity that I hadn't felt in years. I was no longer just an observer, a ghost in the machine. I was now an active architect, preparing to remodel the future of my own company. My study, once a place of quiet retirement, had become a command center. Multiple monitors displayed streams of data, network schematics, and the encrypted files I had mirrored from the Vance Innovation servers. It was a war room, and I was its sole general. My first move was to secure my alliances. The data I had gathered was explosive, but data without a trusted delivery system is just noise. I needed to ensure that when the dust settled, the right people were in place to pick up the pieces. I made 2 phone calls. The first was to a man named Marcus Thorne, not my friend the furniture maker, but a different Marcus, Marcus Cole, a shrewd and honorable man who sat on the company's board of directors. He was one of the few old guard members Charlotte hadn't managed to push out, largely because his holdings in the company were significant and his reputation in the industry was unimpeachable. He had always been a quiet supporter of mine, and I had sensed his growing unease with Charlotte's leadership. We met at dawn in a small, discreet coffee shop miles from the city center. I didn't bring my computer. I brought a single sealed envelope. "Marcus," I began, my voice low, "in 1 hour you will receive a highly encrypted email. The password is Eleanor 1985. What you will find inside is a detailed account of Charlotte's plan to sell this company for parts to Omnicorp. You will find contracts, timelines, and a plan for the termination of over 70% of our workforce. You will also find evidence of her personal plans to move the proceeds offshore." Marcus stared at me, his face pale in the morning light. "Arthur, are you—" For the next 20 minutes, I conducted a digital reconnaissance. I found what I expected. Emails confirming the final stages of the Omnicorp deal, a timeline for the closing, drafts of the press release announcing the acquisition. But I also found something more personal and far more damning. I found a hidden folder containing her personal financial statements, and I found a series of emails between her and a private wealth manager. She wasn't just planning to sell the company, she was planning her escape. The emails detailed a complex scheme to move the proceeds of the sale, a sum that would be in the hundreds of millions, into a series of offshore accounts in jurisdictions with no extradition treaties. She wasn't just cashing out, she was planning to vanish, leaving the gutted company, its employees, and her own history behind without a trace. And then I saw the final, coldest piece of the puzzle. In a subfolder labeled Estate Planning, I found a single chilling document. It was a draft of a legal petition prepared by her lawyers, a petition for conservatorship over my assets, citing declining cognitive health and erratic financial behavior. It was dated 3 weeks ago. The last piece of the blueprint clicked into place. Firing me was just the first step. If I had protested, if I had caused trouble, she would have immediately filed this petition. She would have used my own grief and righteous anger as evidence of my instability. She had planned for every contingency. She hadn't just built a plan to sell the company, she had built a cage for me. I took a picture of the document with my phone, my hands steady now, the earlier tremor replaced by an icy calm. This was no longer just a business battle. This was a fight for my freedom, my identity. I closed the tablet, wiped it clean of my fingerprints, and placed it exactly where I had found it. Before I left the room, I did one more thing, an impulse, an architect's signature. I took the small wooden bird Ben had carved for me from my pocket. I had started carrying it as a reminder of what was real, and I placed it gently inside Eleanor's jewelry box, right where the key had been. It was a small, quiet act, a substitution. She had taken something of value from this box to execute her betrayal. I was leaving behind a symbol of clumsy, heartfelt, and honest creation. Let her find that, I thought. Let her wonder what it meant. I walked downstairs, my purpose clear. I went to the attic, a dusty, forgotten space, and found the box of old photographs. I took it, as planned. It was my alibi, the reason for my visit. As I walked out of the house, locking the door behind me, I felt like a different man. The grieving father who had entered was gone forever. I was now a soldier in a war I didn't start, but one I was determined to finish. Back in the safety of my own study, the real work began. With both halves of the cryptographic key, the code in my head, and the USB drive in my hand, I could now activate the Eleanor protocol. It was a delicate operation. I couldn't just storm the digital castle. Charlotte was arrogant, but not stupid. Her IT team would detect a full-scale system override. I had to be a ghost in the machine. The protocol had a secondary function. One I had designed for just such a scenario of internal corruption. It was a deep audit mode, which allowed me to create a perfect, time-stamped, and incorruptible mirror of the entire network, all without triggering any active system alerts. It was a digital ghost, silently duplicating every file, every email, every keystroke. For the next week, I became a nocturnal creature. I worked from midnight until dawn, the hours when network traffic was at its lowest. I initiated the deep audit. The data flowed to a secure, encrypted server I had set up, a digital, safe deposit box. I copied everything related to the Omnicorp deal, the contracts, the hidden clauses that detailed the plans for mass layoffs, the private communications between Charlotte and the Omnicorp CEO, and I copied her personal files, the ones she thought were firewalled from the corporate network, the offshore account details, the conservatorship petition, and her private emails, which were filled with dismissive, cruel remarks about me and the old guard at the company. I gathered an arsenal of truth, a digital dossier that would be her undoing. As the day of the Omnicorp deal approached, I could sense her growing confidence. The company-wide memos became more frequent, filled with corporate buzzwords about a bold new chapter and synergistic futures. She was preparing the employees for their own execution, dressing it up as a glorious evolution. My final move had to be timed to perfection. It couldn't be an email. It couldn't be a lawsuit. That would be too slow, too easy for her to spin. It had to be an architectural intervention. It had to be a public, undeniable, and structurally flawless demolition of her entire narrative. Found my opportunity in the final, all-hands meeting she had scheduled for the day before the sale was to be finalized. She had booked the grand auditorium in the Vance Innovations building. Attendance was mandatory. She was going to announce the merger, her moment of ultimate triumph. She was going to stand on a stage in front of the people whose lives she was about to destroy and accept their applause. She had no idea that the architect of the building had other plans for the presentation. She thought she controlled the system, but the system now belonged to me. The master key was in my hand. The ghost was in the machine, and he was about to make his presence known. The obsolete relic was about to deliver one final, unforgettable keynote address. In the 24 hours before Charlotte's triumphant all-hands meeting, I did not sleep. Sleep was a luxury I could not afford. Instead, I worked, moving with a quiet, focused intensity that I hadn't felt in years. I was no longer just an observer, a ghost in the machine. I was now an active architect, preparing to remodel the future of my own company. My study, once a place of quiet retirement, had become a command center. Multiple monitors displayed streams of data, network schematics, and the encrypted files I had mirrored from the Vance Innovations servers. It was a war room, and I was its sole general. My first move was to secure my alliances. The data I had gathered was explosive, but data without a trusted delivery system is just noise. I needed to ensure that when the dust settled, the right people were in place to pick up the pieces. I made 2 phone calls. The first was to a man named Marcus Thorne. Not my friend the furniture maker, but a different Marcus. Marcus Cole, a shrewd and honorable man who sat on the company's board of directors. He was one of the few old guard members Charlotte hadn't managed to push out, largely because his holdings in the company were significant and his reputation in the industry was unimpeachable. He had always been a quiet supporter of mine, and I had sensed his growing unease with Charlotte's leadership. We met at dawn in a small, discreet coffee shop miles from the city center. I didn't bring my computer. I brought a single sealed envelope. "Marcus," I began, my voice low, "in 1 hour you will receive a highly encrypted email. The password is Eleanor 1985. What you will find inside is a detailed account of Charlotte's plan to sell this company for parts to Omnicorp. You will find contracts, timelines, and a plan for the termination of over 70% of our workforce. You will also find evidence of her personal plans to move the proceeds offshore." Marcus stared at me, his face pale in the morning light. "Arthur, are you certain?" "I have the server logs to prove it," I said, my voice leaving no room for doubt. I slid the envelope across the table. "This contains a hard copy of a single document, a petition for conservatorship over my assets that she had her lawyers draft. She was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent if I stood in her way." He opened the envelope, his eyes scanning the page. The color drained from his face. He looked up at me, his expression a mixture of shock and dawning fury. That monster. "I am not asking you to act on this now," I said. "I am asking you to be ready. Tomorrow, at the all-hands meeting, Charlotte's narrative will be publicly dismantled. There will be chaos. The board will need to act swiftly to stabilize the company. I need to know that when the time comes, there will be a voice of reason and integrity ready to lead. I need to know you will be that voice." He looked down at the document in his hands, then back at me, his jaw set. "Arthur," he said, his voice firm, "you have my word. I will not let her burn down the house you built." My second call was more difficult. It was to Frank, the facilities manager who had told me about the photos in the sub-basement. He was a good man, loyal, but he was also a company employee with a mortgage and a family. What I was about to ask of him put him at considerable risk. "Frank," I said when he answered, "I need a favor, and I need your absolute discretion. It's a matter of the company's survival." I explained what I needed. Access. Physical access to the auditorium's main control room an hour before the meeting. I needed him to look the other way, to ensure a certain door was left unlocked and that the AV technician on duty was sent on a conveniently timed coffee run. I didn't tell him why. I simply told him that the future of Vance Innovations depended on it. He was silent for a long moment. I could hear the fear in his silence. "Arthur," he finally said, his voice a whisper. "She'll fire me if she finds out." "I know," I said softly. "But if you don't do this, Frank, there won't be a company for her to fire you from. Omnicorp will gut this place. Your job will be gone either way. This is a chance to fight for it." Another pause. Then a quiet, resolute, "The south corridor access door to the control room will be unlocked at 9 a.m. You'll have a 30-minute window. Godspeed, Arthur." He was a good man. I made a mental note to ensure that whatever happened, Frank would be protected. The final piece of my plan was the presentation itself. I couldn't just dump a folder of incriminating files onto the auditorium's main screen. That would be chaotic, unprofessional. It would look like the act of a bitter old man, just as Charlotte would claim. No, my presentation had to be an architectural marvel. It had to be clean, logical, and devastatingly precise. It had to tell a story. I spent the rest of the day and most of the night crafting it. I used the company's own presentation software, the glossy Charlotte-approved template. I titled it, Vance Innovations, a Structural Review. The presentation was divided into 3 acts. Act Y was titled The Foundation. It would begin with a silent, scrolling slideshow of the photos from the legacy wing, the ones Charlotte had buried in the basement. The picture of me and Eleanor in the garage, the early team photos, the milestones. It would be a quiet, powerful reminder of where we came from, set to a piece of simple, poignant classical music. Act 2 was titled The Current Design. This section would start with Charlotte's own words, video clips from past interviews where she spoke of transparency, employee value, and a legacy of innovation. Then I would juxtapose those clips with the hard evidence. A slide showing the Omnicorp contract with the mass layoff clause highlighted in red. A slide showing the org chart of the new gutted company. A slide showing the offshore account information, a complex web of shell corporations. I would use her own glossy corporate graphics to illustrate the architecture of her deceit. I would let her own lies condemn her. Act 3 was titled A Proposed Redesign. This was the most important part. I wouldn't just be tearing her down. I would be presenting a viable, alternative future. I had spent the last week using my knowledge of the company and the market to draft a counter-proposal, a plan for an employee-led buyout, funded by a consortium of ethical investors I had already discreetly contacted. A plan that would not only save the company but transform it, giving ownership back to the people who had built it with their own hands. I would show them a blueprint for hope, a way to save their own futures. The final slide would be a simple, black screen with a single line of text in white. A structure is only as strong as its integrity. As dawn broke, my work was complete. I uploaded the presentation file to a secure cloud server, accessible only by a unique, one-time use link. I then wrote a simple script, a piece of code that, when activated by the Eleanor protocol key, would bypass the auditorium's designated presentation laptop and stream my structural review directly to the main projector. Charlotte, standing on her stage, would have a front row seat to her own public demolition, and she would be utterly powerless to stop it. I showered, shaved, and put on my best suit, the one I had worn to Eleanor's funeral. It felt appropriate. Today was, in a way, another funeral. The funeral for the daughter I thought I knew, and for the company she had tried to corrupt. I arrived at the Vance Innovations building at precisely 9:15 a.m. I didn't go through the main lobby. I used a service entrance and made my way to the south corridor. As promised, the door to the AV control room was unlocked. The room was empty. I sat down at the control panel. My hands were steady. I inserted the Eleanor protocol key into a dedicated server port. A command line interface appeared on the screen. I typed in the first half of the cryptographic key, the string of code I knew by heart. The system recognized it. A new prompt appeared, waiting for the final authentication. From the USB drive, I initiated the script I had written. The code was a ghost, slipping into the system, overriding the scheduled presentation with my own. It was done in less than a minute. I then activated the deep audit protocol one last time, setting it to record every single network activity. That would happen in the next hour. Every panicked text message, every deleted file would be captured. I removed the key, slipped it back into my pocket, and walked out of the control room, locking the door behind me. I made my way not to the auditorium, but to a small private conference room I knew on the floor below, one with a live video feed of the main stage. I wouldn't be in the room when the bomb went off, but I would watch every second of the explosion. The stage was set. The audience was assembling. The obsolete relic was about to take his final bow. From the quiet solitude of the conference room, I watched the auditorium fill up on the monitor before me. It was a sea of familiar faces, engineers I had hired out of college, marketers who had launched our first products, administrative staff who knew the company's history better than Charlotte ever would. They were chatting, sipping coffee, completely unaware that they were attending a public execution and that they were the ones scheduled to be on the chopping block. They believed they were here to celebrate a bright new future. The dramatic irony was a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. I saw Marcus Cole take his seat in the front row, his face a stoic mask. Our eyes met for a brief second through the camera's lens, a silent acknowledgement. He was ready. On the other side of the room, I saw Charlotte's inner circle, her sycophantic. CFO and her razor-sharp legal counsel, laughing and shaking hands, basking in the glow of their impending victory. They were peacocks, preening before a feast they believed was in their honor. At precisely 10 a.m., the lights dimmed. A sleek corporate video filled the massive screen behind the podium, a montage of smiling employees and soaring stock charts, all set to an upbeat generic electronic track. It was a hollow, soulless piece of propaganda, and it was the last thing that would go according to Charlotte's plan. When the video faded, she walked onto the stage to a wave of enthusiastic applause. She looked magnificent, a queen in her element. She wore a tailored power suit the color of blood, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant style. She radiated confidence, control, and absolute authority. She stood at the podium, basking in the applause for a moment, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. "Thank you," she began, her voice smooth and resonant, amplified throughout the hall. "Thank you all for being here on this historic day. When I took the helm of this company 5 years ago, I promised a new era of innovation, growth, and forward-thinking leadership. Today, I am proud to announce the next phase of that evolution." She paused for dramatic effect, her eyes sweeping across the crowd. "Today, we are not just a company. We are a legacy, and we are about to embark on a bold new chapter, a synergistic partnership that will redefine our industry and secure our place as a global leader for decades to come." She was a masterful performer. Her words were empty, but her delivery was flawless. The crowd was captivated, hanging on her every word. From my command center, I took a slow, steadying breath. I placed my finger on the single key on my laptop that would activate the script. Not yet, I thought. Let her build the pedestal a little higher. The fall will be that much greater. "I know there have been rumors," she continued, her tone shifting to one of feigned sincerity. "And I want to address them head-on. Change is always accompanied by uncertainty, but I want to assure each and every one of you that this move has been made with your best interests at heart. This is about securing our future, your future." That was my cue. The hypocrisy was too perfect, too profound. I pressed the key. On the stage, Charlotte gestured to the screen behind her. "And now, I'd like to walk you through the architecture of this exciting new—" Her voice trailed off. The screen behind her did not show the glossy slides of her presentation. Instead, it remained black for a single heart-stopping second. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. She tapped the podium, glancing nervously at the AV booth in the back. And then, the first image appeared. It wasn't a corporate logo, it was a faded black-and-white photograph. A young man and a young woman, their faces bright with hope and exhaustion, standing in a cluttered garage, a crude hand-painted sign that read "Vance Innovations" hanging on the wall behind them. It was me and Eleanor. A stunned silence fell over the auditorium. The slide was followed by another, and another. The photos from the legacy wing, the ones she had buried, now filled a screen 40 feet wide. The early teams, the late nights, the product launches, the Christmas parties, 30 years of history, of human connection, of shared struggle and triumph, scrolling by in a silent, powerful montage. The only sound was the soft, poignant melody of a lone piano, a piece Eleanor used to play. Charlotte was frozen, her confident smile replaced by a mask of horrified disbelief. She was frantically gesturing to the control booth, but the presentation continued, controlled by a ghost she couldn't see. When the final photo, a picture of me handing a younger Charlotte her diploma at her MBA graduation, faded to black, Act 2 began. The title appeared in stark white letters, the current design. Her own face filled the screen, a clip from a business news interview she had given a year ago. "At Vance Innovations," she said, her voice dripping with corporate sincerity, "our employees are not just our greatest asset, they are our family. We believe in transparency and loyalty above all else." As her recorded voice spoke of loyalty, the screen split. On one side was her smiling face. On the other, a document appeared, the Omnicorp acquisition contract, and my script, with surgical precision, highlighted a single clause in bright red. Clause 7.4, redundancy and restructuring. The acquiring party, Omnicorp, reserves the right to terminate up to 75% of existing staff within the first 90 days to achieve operational synergy. A collective gasp swept through the auditorium. The whispers started, a low, angry buzz that grew in volume. The presentation continued, relentless and methodical. Her recorded voice would speak a platitude, and the screen would answer with a cold, hard fact. Her voice: "We are building a legacy of innovation that will last for 100 years. The screen: a detailed financial chart showing Omnicorp's plan to dissolve the Vance R&D department and sell off its patents individually. Her voice: "This partnership is about a shared vision for the future." The screen: an email from the Omnicorp CEO to his board which I had unearthed. It read, "The Vance acquisition is a simple strip mine. We'll take the IP, liquidate the assets, and absorb their client list. The brand itself is obsolete. We should have it fully dismantled within 6 months." The angry buzz in the auditorium was now a low roar. People were turning to each other, their faces a mixture of betrayal and fury. They were no longer an audience. They were a jury, witnessing the live vivisection of a lie. Charlotte stood on the stage, paralyzed. Her face was ashen. She tried to speak into the microphone, but no words came out. She was completely, utterly exposed, stripped bare in front of the very people she had intended to deceive. The final piece of Act 2 was the most personal and the most brutal. It was a slide titled Estate Planning, and on it was the photo I had taken of the conservatorship petition from her tablet. The legal jargon was dense, but the intent was clear to everyone in the room. My script highlighted the key phrase: "Due to the declining cognitive health and erratic behavior of Arthur Vance." And then I let them hear her voice one last time. It was a recording of the phone call she had made to me in my study, the one I knew was being recorded by the deep audit protocol. Her voice, cold and dismissive, filled the hall. "It's a business decision, Dad, not a personal one. He's obsolete. There's no room for obsolete relics." That was it. The final demolition charge. The illusion of the caring, forward-thinking CEO was obliterated. In her place stood a usurper, a liar, and a daughter who had called her own father a relic, while simultaneously planning to have him declared insane. The roar of the crowd was now deafening. People were standing, shouting. Her inner circle, who had been laughing just minutes before, were now staring at her in horror, slowly backing away as if she were radioactive. Charlotte finally found her voice. It wasn't a speech. It was a raw, animal scream of pure rage. "Turn it off!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the control booth. "I said, turn it off!" But the presentation wasn't finished. It had one final act. As her screams echoed through the hall, the screen went black again, and then new words appeared, calm and clear, under the title, "A Proposed Redesign. The Employee-Led Buyout. The Blueprint for Hope." My voice, recorded earlier, filled the auditorium, overriding her screams. It was calm, steady, and full of an authority she had never known. "There is another way," my voice said. "A future where this company belongs not to a corporate raider but to you, the people who built it. This is not the end of Vance Innovations. It is the beginning. And as the details of the buyout plan filled the screen, a new sound began to ripple through the crowd, drowning out the chaos. It started with a few people, then spread. It was applause. Not for Charlotte, not for me. It was applause for an idea, for a chance, for a future they had, just moments ago, believed was lost forever. On the stage, Charlotte stood alone, a solitary, broken figure amidst the ruins of her own making. The security guards she had sent to escort me out of my own company were now moving towards her, not to protect her, but to contain her. Her reign was over. The climax wasn't a quiet click in a boardroom. It was a symphony of destruction, played out on a 40-foot screen with an audience of 1,000 witnesses, and the obsolete relic, sitting alone in a small room 1 floor. Below had been its silent, invisible conductor. The immediate aftermath of my presentation was, as I had anticipated, chaos. Charlotte was escorted off the stage, her face a mask of disbelief and incandescent rage. She was shouting, not about the deal, but about me, about my betrayal, my senility, my sabotage. It was the desperate, flailing tantrum of a queen whose castle had just been turned to dust before her eyes. The Omnicorp representatives who had been sitting in a VIP box near the front slipped out a side door, their faces pale. The deal wasn't just dead. It was a toxic asset, a PR nightmare of epic proportions. As the employees filed out of the auditorium, their shock and anger began to coalesce into something else, a fragile but determined sense of purpose. My proposed redesign had done more than just expose a villain. It had provided a blueprint for heroes. The board of directors convened an emergency meeting within the hour. It was, according to Marcus Cole, the shortest and most decisive board meeting in the company's history. Charlotte was terminated, effective immediately, for gross misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. Her inner circle, the CFO and legal counsel, who had been complicit in her scheme, resigned before they could be fired. The vote was unanimous. By the end of the day, the board had installed a temporary leadership team, with Marcus Cole acting as interim CEO. His first official act was to walk down to the sub-basement, personally retrieve the photograph of me and Eleanor, and hang it back in its rightful place of honor in the legacy wing. It was a small, symbolic act, but it sent a powerful message throughout the company. The foundation was being restored. I did not return to the office that day. I went home. I walked into my quiet study, shut down the monitors of my command center, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. There was no joy, no sense of triumph, only a profound, aching sadness. I had won. But in order to win, I had been forced to publicly, brutally, and irrevocably destroy my own daughter. It was a victory that would forever be shadowed by the grief of that necessity. The battle for Vance Innovations, however, was far from over. Saving the company from Omnicorp was one thing. Saving it from itself was another. The employee-led buyout I had proposed was a radical idea, a Hail Mary pass designed to inspire hope. Turning it into a reality would require a feat of financial and logistical architecture more complex than any building I had ever designed. And that is where the true climax of my power was revealed. It was not in the act of demolition. It was in the act of reconstruction. For the next 6 months, I worked harder than I had since the early days in the garage. I didn't take a title. I didn't take an office. I became a quiet, guiding hand, working alongside Marcus and a newly formed employee council. We brought in ethical investors, the ones I had already vetted, who were more interested in sustainable growth than in strip mining for profit. We restructured the company's finances, not from the top down, but from the bottom up. My role was that of the chief architect. I spent my days not in boardrooms, but in conference rooms with engineers and marketers, sketching out new futures on whiteboards. We analyzed every department, every project, and we made decisions collectively. For the first time, the people whose hands were building the products had a voice in the design of the company's future. It was a grueling, exhausting process, but it was also the most rewarding work of my life. I saw the spirit of the old Vance. Innovations, the scrappy, innovative, collaborative spirit, reignite. The fear and cynicism that had permeated the culture under Charlotte were replaced by a sense of ownership, of shared purpose. We weren't just employees anymore. We were partners. The final buyout was a complex tapestry of employee stock options, investor capital, and a significant loan from a local bank that believed in our new vision. On the day the deal was finalized, the day Vance Innovations officially became a majority employee-owned company, we didn't celebrate with a lavish party. We held a simple town hall in the same auditorium where Charlotte had met her downfall. Marcus stood at the podium and spoke of the company's new chapter. He spoke of shared responsibility and shared rewards. And then he called me to the stage. As I walked up, the applause was deafening. It wasn't the polite, obligatory applause of a corporate meeting. It was a roar, a heartfelt, thunderous expression of gratitude. I stood at the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. Faces full of hope, relief, and a fierce, protective pride. "I am not a CEO," I said, my voice steady. "I am not a chairman. I am an architect. And like any architect, I know that a structure is only as strong as its foundation. For a while, we lost our way. We built on a foundation of greed and fear. Today, we begin again, on a new foundation. A foundation built on your talent, your dedication, and your integrity." I looked out at them, my people, my partners. "This is your company now," I said. "Build something that lasts." That was my true retirement. My power was no longer held in a title or a master key. It was now diffused, invested into the hands of the hundreds of people who were the true lifeblood of the company. I had given them back their future. As for Charlotte, her fall was as swift and brutal as her rise had been. The Omnicorp deal collapsed, of course, but that was the least of her worries. The mirrored server data I had collected became the basis for a shareholder lawsuit and a federal investigation into securities fraud. Faced with a mountain of undeniable evidence, she was indicted. The conservatorship petition, though never filed, was presented as evidence of her malicious intent, a chilling portrait of her character. Her legal battles would drag on for years, draining her of the fortune she had so desperately tried to secure. I did not follow the proceedings closely. It was a story that no longer concerned me. Her fate was the inevitable result of her own flawed architecture. A structure built on a foundation of lies is designed to collapse. My final act in this saga was a quiet one. I went down to the sub-basement one last time. The boxes of financial records were still there, but one corner of the room had been cleared. In it, stacked neatly, were all of Charlotte's personal effects from her office. The abstract art, the chrome awards, the symbols of her brief, cold reign. The company had packed them up, and she had never claimed them. They were relics of a ghost, artifacts from a tomb of her own making. I didn't touch them. I simply stood there for a moment, in the cold, quiet room, and I felt a flicker of something that was almost pity. She had had the world at her fingertips, a kingdom I had built for her, and she had traded it all for a handful of silver. It was a tragedy of almost biblical proportions. I turned and walked away, closing the door on that chapter of my life for the last time. As I walked back up into the light, I heard the sound of laughter echoing down the hallway from the main engineering lab. It was the sound of people building, creating, collaborating. It was the sound of a company that was alive again. And I smiled. The demolition was over. The reconstruction was complete. And the structure, I knew, was stronger than ever. A year after the employee buyout, I was in my workshop, sanding a piece of reclaimed walnut, when the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go, but something compelled me to answer. Hello? Arthur Vance? The voice on the other end was professional, unfamiliar. This is Robert Miller from the Federal Public Defender's Office. I'm representing your daughter, Charlotte Vance. I was silent, my hand tightening. On the smooth, cool wood of the walnut, she has taken a plea deal, the lawyer continued, his tone matter-of-fact. Securities fraud, wire fraud. She's facing a significant sentence. As part of the plea, she is required to issue a formal apology to the shareholders and employees she defrauded. She has also requested a personal meeting with you before her sentencing. The request hit me with the force of an unexpected blow. A meeting, after everything. What could she possibly have left to say? Why? I asked, my voice a rough whisper. She says, the lawyer paused as if consulting his notes. She says she wants to explain. She believes you are the only one who will understand. The audacity of it was breathtaking. After trying to erase me, to have me declared incompetent, to sell my life's work and sacrifice my people, she now believed I was the only one who could understand her. It was the final, desperate gambit of a master manipulator. My first instinct was to say no, to refuse, to cut the final thread. I had won. I had rebuilt my company. I had found my peace. Why would I walk back into the ruins? But then, I thought of Eleanor. I thought of my promise. Don't let her stumble. I had stopped her from demolishing my legacy, but I had not fulfilled that final, most difficult part of the promise. I had saved the company, but I had not saved her. Perhaps, in the end, she was unsavable. But I had to know. I had to look into the abyss one last time. I will meet with her, I said. On my terms, in my home. The meeting took place a week later. She arrived with her public defender, looking like a shadow of her former self. The power suit was gone, replaced by a simple gray dress. The severe, elegant hairstyle was gone, her hair hanging limp and lifeless. The fire in her eyes had been extinguished, leaving behind only the cold gray ash of defeat. We sat in my living room, the same room where Eleanor and I had dreamed up the first designs for Vance Innovations. The public defender sat discreetly in the corner, a silent witness. She didn't speak for a long time. She just looked around the room, at the worn leather armchair, at the photographs of her mother on the mantelpiece, as if seeing them for the first time. I used to hate this room, she finally said, her voice a dry, cracking whisper. I thought it was old-fashioned, obsolete. She looked at me, her eyes hollow. I was wrong. It's solid. Foundations matter, I said simply. She flinched at the word, then gave a small, bitter nod. My lawyer said I should apologize, that it might look good for the judge. She met my gaze. But I know you. You can see through a performance. So I will tell you the truth instead. She took a breath. I didn't do it for the money. Not really. The money was just the way you keep score. I did it because I was terrified. Terrified? I asked, the word sounding absurd. You were the most powerful person in the company. I was terrified of your shadow, she said, the words spilling out now. My whole life I was Arthur Vance's daughter. Everything I achieved, everyone whispered it was because of you. The MBA, the promotions, the CEO position. It was never mine. It was always yours, handed down to me. I had to sell the company. I had to erase the history. I had to erase you. It was the only way I could prove to myself, to the world, that I could build something on my own. I listened, and for the first time, I understood the flawed, tragic architecture of her motivation. It wasn't just greed. It was a desperate, pathological need for her own identity, a need so profound that she was willing to demolish the very foundation that had given her a platform to build upon in the first place. She hadn't been trying to steal my company. She had been trying to steal my legacy, to claim it as her own. So you built your entire future, I said softly, on a foundation of a lie. Yes, she whispered, tears finally tracing paths down her pale cheeks. And it collapsed, just like you always said a poorly designed structure would. We sat in the silence that followed. It was not a silence of anger, but of a deep, profound, and shared tragedy. The tragedy of a father who had given his daughter a world, but had failed to give her a sense of her own place in it. The tragedy of a daughter who, in her desperate search for her own identity, had destroyed the only person who truly saw her as a legacy, not a liability. There is one more thing, I said, rising and walking to my study. I returned with a single thick file and placed it on the table in front of her. She looked at it, confused. What is this? It's the algorithm, I said. The compression framework. I tried to show you that day. The one you told me to email to R&D. Her eyes widened in dawning recognition. After the buyout, I continued, I brought it to the new employee-led board. They saw its potential immediately. We patented it. It's now the core of our new flagship product, Vance Legacy. It's projected to triple the company's value over the next 5 years. I let that sink in. The innovation she had dismissed, the idea from the obsolete relic she had ignored, was now the very thing securing the future of the company she had tried to sell for scraps. The company, I said, my voice quiet but firm, has decided to allocate 5% of the net profits from this patent into a trust. Your name is on it. It will be managed by an independent trustee. When you are released, it will be there for you. Not as an inheritance, not as a gift, but as a reminder. A reminder of the value of listening. A reminder of what you discarded. She stared at the file, then at me, her face a canvas of conflicting emotions, shame, regret, and a flicker of something I hadn't seen in years, awe. Why? She whispered. After everything? Why? Because of my promise to your mother, I said, my voice thick with the memory of Eleanor's hand in mine. I promised her I would be your foundation. A foundation doesn't abandon the structure built upon it, even when that structure is flawed, broken, and condemned. It continues to offer support in the hope that one day a better, stronger structure can be rebuilt upon it. That was our final conversation. That was the true climax. It wasn't in a boardroom. It wasn't in a courtroom. It was here, in this quiet living room where the full, devastating consequences of her choices and the enduring, unbreakable strength of my promise finally met. I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. Goodbye, Charlotte. As she walked to the door, she paused, her hand on the knob. She looked back at the photographs on the mantelpiece, at the solid, comfortable furniture, at the quiet, unshakable integrity of the room. You were right, Dad, she said, her voice barely audible. It is solid. And then she was gone. I stood in the silence, not of loss, but of closure. The master key had not just given me back my company. It had given me back the final word in my own story. And that word was not obsolete. It was enduring. After Charlotte walked out of my house for the last time, a different kind of silence settled in. It wasn't the heavy, grief-stricken silence that had followed Eleanor's passing. It wasn't the tense, strategic silence of the war I had waged. This was a new silence. It was the quiet, settled peace of a project completed. A structure finally at rest. The ghosts of the past had been faced, the story had been told, and the foundation, my foundation, had proven its strength. Charlotte was sentenced to 7 years in a federal facility. A lenient sentence, the prosecutor said, due to her eventual plea and cooperation. I did not attend the sentencing. Her story was now hers to live, and mine was mine to rebuild. The trust I established for her, funded by the innovation she had dismissed, was my final act as her father. It was not a reward. It was a tool, a chance for her to, one day, begin her own reconstruction. Whether she would ever choose to use. It was a question I knew I would never have the answer to, and I found I was at peace with that. My life, which had been so consumed by conflict, now opened up into a space of quiet purpose. Vance Innovations, under the leadership of Marcus Cole and the Employee Council, thrived in a way it never had under Charlotte. It became a model in the tech industry for ethical leadership and employee ownership. The Vance Legacy software, built on my obsolete algorithm, became the new industry standard. The company wasn't just profitable, it was healthy. The soul had been restored. I never returned to a formal role. My work was done. But I did establish a small independent workshop, funded by the company right on the Vance Innovations campus. It was called the Founder's Forge. It wasn't an office or a lab, it was a place for mentorship. I spent my days there, not designing products, but helping the company's young, brilliant engineers think about the why behind the what. I taught them about architectural integrity, not just in code, but in character. I told them my story, the real story, as a cautionary tale and as a lesson in the importance of a solid foundation. Innovation without integrity, I would tell them, is just a faster way to collapse. The young engineers, the new generation of Vance, didn't see me as an obsolete relic. They saw me as a cornerstone. They would bring me their problems, their half-formed ideas, and in the quiet of the forge, amidst the smell of coffee and whiteboard, markers, we would talk, we would sketch, and we would build. It was the most satisfying work of my life. I was no longer just the founder. I had become the foundation. One day, Marcus came to the forge. He was holding a small, elegantly wrapped box. "This came for you," he said, a curious smile on his face. "From the Second Chance Builders program." I remembered the program, the one I had anonymously donated the last dregs of Charlotte's liquidated assets 2 years ago, the one that taught prison inmates skilled trades. I opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of simple cotton, was a beautifully crafted master key. It was carved from a single piece of dark walnut, polished to a deep, lustrous shine. It wasn't a functional key, of course. It was a sculpture, an object of art. Attached was a simple, handwritten note. "Mr. Vance," it read, "we don't know why you made your donation, but we wanted to thank you. This key was crafted by a former inmate who is now a master carpenter and a mentor in our program. He said to tell you that sometimes the right key doesn't just unlock a door. It helps you build a whole new house. Thank you for giving us the tools." I held the wooden key in my hand, the weight of it both heavy and light. It was a perfect, beautiful, and completely unexpected circle. The last remnants of my daughter's destructive greed had been transformed into a symbol of reconstruction and hope. The money she had tried to steal was now helping broken men learn how to build again. It was the most profound form of poetic justice I could have ever imagined. I placed the wooden key on the central workbench in the forge where it sits to this day. It serves as a constant reminder. A reminder that the ultimate power lies not in what you can take, control, or demolish, but in what you can build, restore, and inspire. My life now is a quiet one. It is a life measured in the excited chatter of young engineers, the warm camaraderie of old friends, and the silent, satisfying work of my hands. I am at peace in the house Eleanor and I built, a house that withstood the greatest storm imaginable. I sometimes receive letters forwarded from the company, from people who have heard my story. They are often from parents struggling with their own children, or from older employees who feel they are being pushed aside. They ask for my advice, and I always write back the same simple thing. Do not mistake kindness for weakness. Do not mistake silence for surrender, and never forget that you are the architect of your own life. When someone tries to demolish your structure, do not despair. See it as an opportunity to inspect your own foundation, to reinforce what is strong, to tear out what is rotten, and to rebuild with purpose and with integrity something better, something that will endure. My story with Charlotte is over. Her name is a scar on my heart, a reminder of a profound and painful loss. But a scar is also a sign of a wound that has healed. It does not define the man I am today. I am Arthur Vance. I am a father. I am a mentor. I am an architect. And the structure I have built, the legacy I will leave behind, is not a company worth billions. It is a simple, enduring truth. The foundation is everything. And a foundation built on integrity can never, ever be made obsolete. The May seasons turned. The raw, jagged edges of the boardroom coup began to soften, not with forgetting, but with the slow accumulation of new days, new routines. The climactic moments of a story are loud and dramatic, but the true measure of a life is found in the quiet rhythm of what comes after. My power, I was learning, wasn't a weapon to be wielded in a single decisive battle. It was a tool to be used day after day in the patient, often thankless, work of reconstruction. Vance Innovations, under the leadership of Marcus Cole and the new employee-owned structure, entered a renaissance. It became a beacon in the tech industry, a testament to the idea that a company could be both profitable and humane. The Vance Legacy software, the algorithm Charlotte had dismissed as the ramblings of an old man, became the company's new cornerstone, securing its future for a generation. The spirit of the garage, the spirit of collaboration, innovation, and mutual respect, was alive and well. I never took a formal title again. My role was more organic, more meaningful. I was the company's institutional memory, its living foundation. The Founders Forge became the true heart of the campus. It was a place where the brightest young minds would come not just for technical advice, but for perspective. We wouldn't just talk about code. We would talk about ethics. We wouldn't just discuss market share. We would discuss responsibility. I was no longer building a company. I was helping to build its character. This work healed me in ways I never expected. In teaching this new generation about the importance of integrity, I was constantly reaffirming my own. In helping them navigate the challenges of building a career, I was reframing my own narrative, not as a story of betrayal, but as a story of endurance. Years passed. The world changed. Technology evolved. But the principles of a solid foundation remained the same. One afternoon, an email arrived. It was a scanned, handwritten letter, forwarded to me by Marcus. The handwriting was neat, careful, and unfamiliar. It was from a woman who had just been paroled. It was from Charlotte. My first impulse was to delete it, to leave the door to the past firmly closed. But a deeper, quieter part of me, the architect who needs to understand the entire structure, compelled me to read it. "Dad," it began. The word itself was a shock, a ghost from another lifetime. "I don't write this to ask for forgiveness. I know I have not earned it. I don't write to ask for a place in your life. I know I have forfeited it. I write this for a simpler reason. To say thank you. Not for the trust fund. I haven't touched it. I don't feel I have the right. I am thanking you for the final lesson, the one you taught me in that boardroom. For my entire life, I saw your quietness as weakness, your integrity as a lack of ambition. I thought building an empire meant being ruthless, that the only way to prove my own strength was to demolish yours. In prison, I started working in the library. I read about history, about architecture. I read about structures that last for centuries, and I finally understood. The strength isn't in the height of the skyscraper. It's in the depth and design of its foundation. You didn't just defeat me. that day. You showed me what real strength is. It's not loud. It's not cruel. It's enduring. I am starting over. I am taking classes. I am trying, for the first time, to build something small, but honest. I don't know if I will succeed, but I know now which blueprints to follow, the ones you left for me, not in a will, but in the example of your life. There was no signature. None was needed. I closed the email, and a sense of profound, quiet closure washed over me. It was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation. It was something far more fundamental. It was understanding. The final broken piece of the structure had finally come to rest. The war was truly over. My life now is a quiet tapestry woven from simple, meaningful threads. The hum of the servers at a company I no longer own but will always be a part of. The rich smell of sawdust in a workshop where young minds are forged. The weight of a beautiful hand-carved wooden key that sits on my desk, a reminder that even from the deepest wreckage, something true can be built. My story is not a tragedy. It is not a simple story of revenge. It is a story of architecture. It is a story about the difference between a facade and a foundation. A facade is designed to impress, but a foundation is designed to endure. And I have learned that the ultimate display of power is not the ability to demolish. It is the quiet, patient, and unwavering strength to build something that lasts, something founded on the bedrock of integrity. I am Arthur Vance. I was declared obsolete. But my legacy, the true company I built, is stronger, healthier, and more enduring than ever. And I have learned that a master key isn't just for unlocking doors. It's for ensuring that the right ones can never be closed again. Thank you for joining me on this journey. The architecture of our lives is a complex thing, full of stresses and unexpected loads. But as this story shows, a foundation built on truth and honor can withstand any storm. If you found strength in this story, please help us build our own community by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Every click is a brick in our foundation. And in the comments below, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What does legacy mean to you? Until next time, remember to be the architect of your own life. Design with integrity, build with purpose, and create something that will endure. Security will see you out. My daughter Charlotte's voice echoed in the glass-walled boardroom I had built, cold, final, as if reading from a memo. My eyes scanned the familiar faces of the board, men and women I had mentored, had trusted, all of them now studying their hands, the floor, anything but me. "Charlotte," I said, my voice rough with disbelief. "This is my company." She smiled, a smile polished in boardrooms but utterly devoid of warmth. "It was, Dad. Now it's mine. And in my vision, there's no room for obsolete relics." Obsolete. The word hung in the air. She thought she had taken everything. She didn't know that hidden in the system she had just inherited, there was a back door, a line of code known only to the architect. She had fired me from the building, but she'd forgotten I still held the master key to the entire empire. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The elevator ride down from the 40th floor, the floor that housed the executive suite I designed, was the longest journey of my life. The two security guards, men I'd known for years, men whose kids I'd asked about at the company Christmas party, stood beside me, their eyes fixed on the illuminated numbers above the door. Their silence was a heavy, suffocating blanket. They weren't just escorting a former chairman. They were participating in a funeral. My funeral. When the doors slid open onto the marble lobby, the vast, sunlit space felt alien. The soaring atrium, the ficus trees I had chosen myself, the quiet hum of productivity, it was all part of a world that no longer belonged to me. As I walked towards the glass doors, I could feel the eyes of the employees on me. They whispered. They stared. They quickly looked away. I wasn't their founder anymore. I was a spectacle, an obsolete relic being wheeled out of the museum. The drive home was an automatic, unthinking process. My hands knew the route, but my mind was miles away, lost in the architecture of the past. To understand the cold, brutal efficiency of my daughter's coup, you have to understand the foundation she chose to dynamite. It wasn't built on spreadsheets and stock options. It was built on a promise. It was 10 years ago. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and fading hope. My wife, Eleanor, the co-architect of my life, was losing her battle with a long illness. In her final lucid moments, her grip on my hand was surprisingly strong, a last flicker of the formidable woman she was. Her eyes, clouded with pain, found mine. "Arthur," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. "Vance Innovations. It's your baby. But Charlotte, she is our legacy." I could only nod, my throat tight with unshed tears. "Promise me," Eleanor insisted, her fingers tightening. "Promise me you'll look after her, that you'll make sure she has a solid foundation. Don't let her stumble. Promise me you'll give her the world you built." "I promise, Ellie," I choked out. "I promise." That promise became the new cornerstone of my life. It was the blueprint I followed for the next decade. Vance Innovations wasn't just a company to me. I started it in a rented garage with $2,000 and a belief that software architecture could be as elegant and enduring as a physical building. I worked 18-hour days, I missed birthdays, I poured my sweat, my youth, and every dollar I had into its foundation. Eleanor was right there with me, managing the books, making coffee at 2 a.m., believing in my vision even when I doubted it myself. It was our third child, the one we raised from nothing. After Eleanor was gone, that promise to her guided every decision. Charlotte, who had earned her MBA and worked her way up the corporate ladder at another firm, expressed a desire to come home. I saw it as the fulfillment of Eleanor's wish. I brought her onto the board. I mentored her. I showed her every nut and bolt of the empire I had built. She was smart, ambitious, and ruthless in a way that the market admired. I mistook her ruthlessness for strength. 5 years ago, I made her CEO. I stepped back, taking the honorary title of Chairman Emeritus, a title she created. It sounded grand. It meant nothing. I had a beautiful office, a generous stipend, and zero power. I had willingly, lovingly handed her the keys to the kingdom. I thought I was fulfilling my promise. I didn't realize I was funding my own obsolescence. The signs were there, of course, small cracks in the facade that I chose to ignore. The first was the restructuring. A year into her tenure as CEO, she called me into her office, my old office. She had redecorated. The warm walnut and leather I had favored were gone, replaced by cold chrome, glass, and a giant abstract painting that looked like an anxiety attack on canvas. "Dad," she began, not rising from her desk, her eyes fixed on her tablet. "We're making some changes to streamline operations. We have to be lean and forward-facing." "What kind of changes?" I asked, a knot tightening in my stomach. "Personnel redundancies," she said, the corporate jargon rolling off her tongue. "We're letting Margaret go." Margaret. My assistant for over 30 years. She wasn't an employee, she was family. She had been there when I couldn't make payroll. In the early days, she had held my hand at Eleanor's funeral. "Redundancy?" I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Margaret is the institutional memory of this company. She knows more about our clients than your entire sales team combined." Charlotte finally looked up, her expression impatient. "She's also 72 and doesn't know how to sync a calendar to the cloud." "It's a business decision, Dad, not a personal one," I argued, I pleaded. I told her loyalty was an asset you couldn't quantify on a balance sheet. She listened with a polite, dismissive smile. The kind you give a child who doesn't understand adult matters. The next day, Margaret's office was empty. She was given a standard severance package and an escort out of the building. Charlotte didn't even say goodbye to her in person. She had HR handle it. That was the day I realized the company I built no longer shared my values. The distance grew. My presence at the office became more symbolic than functional. Charlotte would cancel our weekly lunches, citing meetings I knew were trivial. My input on new projects was no longer sought. It was archived for consideration. I became a ghost, haunting the halls of my own creation. I remember one afternoon, I called her, my voice buzzing with a rare excitement. I had been working on a new algorithm in my home workshop, a side project, a way to keep my mind sharp. It was a potential breakthrough, something that could revolutionize our flagship software. "Charlotte, sweetheart, it's Dad," I said when she answered. "I have something incredible to show you. It's a new compression framework. It could increase our data processing speed by 50%. "Dad, I'm in the middle of a budget review," she said, her voice strained with annoyance. There was talking in the background. She hadn't even bothered to step out of her meeting. "This will only take a minute to explain," I pressed. "The architecture is